The crystal chandelier cast prismatic rainbows across the country club's grand ballroom, each fragment of light catching on champagne flutes and designer jewelry. I stood near the service entrance, my fingers wrapped around a plastic cup of punch that had gone warm 20 minutes ago. The ice had melted, diluting the artificial sweetness until it tasted like liquid disappointment. Fitting, really, for how I felt at my parents' 30th anniversary party. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." My sister Madison's voice rang out like a bell, perfect and clear and impossible to ignore. She stood at the center of the room in a dress that cost more than I made in 3 months. Her smile camera-ready as always. The crowd turned to her like flowers following the sun. They always did. I pressed myself further into the shadows by the kitchen door, watching as she raised her champagne flute. Real crystal, real champagne, Moet and Chandon, if I had to guess. Madison never settled for less. 30 years ago, she began, her voice dripping with practiced emotion. 2 people found each other and created something beautiful, a family, a legacy. She paused for effect, and I saw our mother dab at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Mom and Dad, you gave me everything. The Tesla that takes me to my dreams, the penthouse where I create my content, the trust fund that lets me pursue my passions without fear." The room murmured appreciatively. Someone, probably one of Dad's golf buddies, whistled. Madison's smile grew wider, and that's when her eyes found mine across the room. The smile didn't falter, but something sharp flickered behind it. "And," she continued, her voice taking on a different quality, like honey with glass mixed in. "To my sister Sarah, who taught us all that sometimes, less is more, much, much less." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse. It was awkward, tinged with pity. Heads turned, searching for me, and I felt their eyes like spotlights finding a fumbling performer who'd forgotten their lines. Mrs. Chen from the club leaned over to whisper something to her husband. I caught fragments. The other daughter, community college, such a shame. My mother's voice cut through the murmurs like a scalpel. "Well, we can't all be Madison, can we? Some people are just meant for simpler things." She said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke we were all in on, as if my simplicity was something I'd chosen, like picking a dress off a rack. I made myself smile. It was a skill I'd perfected over the years, the kind of smile that looked like acceptance but was really armor. The kind that said, "Yes, I hear you, and no, you can't hurt me." Even though they could. Even though they did. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that 6 hours earlier, I'd stood in a small office at the Federal Aviation Administration, my hands steady despite my racing heart, and received my commercial pilot's license. The examiner, a weathered man named Captain Rodriguez who'd flown for 40 years, had shaken my hand and said, "In all my years, I've rarely seen someone fly with such precision. You were born for the skies, Captain Chen." Captain Chen. The words still felt surreal, like trying on clothes that were too fine for someone like me. Except they weren't too fine. I'd earned them, one pre-dawn study session at a time, one flight hour scraped together with overtime wages. One sacrifice after another that my family never noticed, because they were too busy documenting Madison's curated life. "Sarah," Madison's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She was walking toward me now, the crowd parting for her like she was royalty. "There you are, hiding as usual. Everyone, my sister prefers to observe from the sidelines. She's always been our little wallflower. Madison. I kept my voice neutral, pleasant even. Another skill I'd mastered. She air-kissed my cheek, and I smelled her perfume, something French and expensive that probably cost more than my monthly bus pass. That dress, she said, loud enough for others to hear, is so you. Vintage is very in right now. Is it from that little thrift shop on Fifth? Goodwill, actually, I said, matching her volume. $20. It's amazing what you can find when you know how to look. Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. You've always been so good at making do. Remember when you wanted to take those flying lessons? She turned to her audience, ready to share another amusing anecdote about her simple sister. She actually thought she could be a pilot. Can you imagine? She gets motion sick on escalators. That was a lie, but I didn't correct her. I'd learned long ago that defending yourself in my family was like struggling in quicksand. The more you fought, the deeper you sank. I suppose we all have our dreams, I said instead, taking a sip of my watered-down punch. Oh, honey. Madison's hand on my shoulder was perfectly manicured, each nail a work of art. Dreams are lovely, but some of us are meant to soar, and others, well, others keep us grounded, don't they? Someone has to be practical. My father appeared then, his face flushed from wine and pride. Pride in Madison, always in Madison. There are my girls. Madison, that toast was perfect. You've got your mother's way with words. He glanced at me, an afterthought. Sarah, you're here, good. Where else would I be? I asked, and he blinked, confused by the question. Where else indeed? I was always here, wasn't I? In the background, in the shadows, in the spaces between their attention. Madison was just telling us about your pilot phase. Mother joined us, her diamonds catching the light. Darling, I do hope you've given up on that nonsense. The rejection letter was a sign, don't you think? Sometimes God closes doors for a reason. The rejection letter. The one they'd opened without my permission, reading my failure aloud at dinner like it was family entertainment. What they didn't know was that the rejection had led me to Captain Helena Morrison, who'd seen something in my tearful late-night phone call that my own family never had, who'd met me at 4 a.m. every morning for 6 months, teaching me to fly in planes held together by prayer and duct tape, because she believed that dreams didn't care about your bank account, only about your determination. You're absolutely right, Mother, I said, and she looked pleased, missing the way I'd agreed with her words, but not her meaning. God had closed a door, and I'd built my own runway instead. The party swirled on around us, Madison regaling her followers, both digital and physical, with stories of her latest brand partnership, my parents basking in her reflected glory. I slipped away eventually, unnoticed as always, and stood on the country club's balcony, looking up at the night sky. Tomorrow I started training on the Boeing 737. In 6 months, I'd be eligible for captain, the youngest female captain in Atlantic Airlines history, if I kept my current pace. But tonight, I was still just Sarah, the other daughter, the one who rode buses and wore Goodwill dresses and dreamed stupid dreams about flying. I pulled out my phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen, and looked at the photo Captain Morrison had taken of me that morning. I was standing in front of a Cessna, holding my commercial license, and I was crying, but they were tears of joy, of triumph, of 1,000 small victories that had led to this moment. Sometimes the view from rock bottom shows you exactly where the sky begins, and I was going to fly higher than any of them could imagine. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't always choose the moments you'd expect to keep. I don't remember my first day of school or my high school graduation speech, but I remember with perfect clarity the day I became invisible in my own home. I was 12. Madison was 14, just starting to bloom into the beauty she'd weaponize later. We'd both auditioned for the school play, The Wizard of Oz. She got Dorothy, I got cast as Munchkin number 3. When we came home with the news, my mother lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. "Dorothy, my baby is Dorothy." She'd pulled Madison into a hug that lasted forever while I stood in the doorway, holding my own small victory. "We'll get you the perfect dress and voice lessons, and oh, we should hire a photographer for opening night." "I got a part too," I'd said, quiet but hopeful. My father glanced up from his newspaper. "That's nice, sweetheart. What is it, stage crew?" Munchkin number 3. The silence that followed taught me everything I needed to know about my place in the family hierarchy. Madison's achievements were celebrations. Mine were footnotes. That's how it started, though maybe it had always been that way, and I just hadn't noticed. Madison got the master bedroom when we moved to the bigger house. She needs space for all her activities, Mom explained. I got the converted storage room above the garage, a space so small I could touch both walls with my arms spread. In winter, ice formed on the inside of the windows. In summer, it was an oven, but it was mine, and I learned to love it the way you love things that nobody else wants. The Tesla came when Madison turned 16, a white Model S that she named Pearl, with custom pink interior lighting and a sound system worth more than most people's cars. She documented the entire gift-giving experience for her budding YouTube channel, our parents beaming in the background as she squealed and cried pretty tears. When I turned 16 2 years later, there was no gathering, no camera, no tears. Just my father sliding a bus pass across the breakfast table. "This should get you where you need to go," he'd said, already turning back to his iPad. "The stop is only a 15-minute walk from here." 20 minutes, actually. 25 in the rain. I know because I walked it every morning for 2 years, leaving the house at 5:45 a.m. to catch the 6:15 bus that got me to school by 7:30. Madison left at 8:15 in Pearl, arriving fresh and perfectly coiffed just as the bell rang. When I mentioned maybe carpooling, she'd laughed. "Sarah, I have a very specific morning routine. My followers expect consistency. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my time, my comfort, my needs, they were all secondary to Madison's image. I understood it when they forgot my 17th birthday entirely. Too busy planning Madison's influencer party to remember their other daughter had aged another year. I understood it when they spent $30,000 on Madison's third gap year to find herself, while telling me that SAT prep books were an unnecessary expense. Why waste money on Sarah's education? I'd heard my father tell my mother one night when they thought I was asleep. Madison's the one going places, Sarah's just Sarah. Just Sarah. As if that explained everything. As if being myself was both a definition and a limitation. I learned to study by streetlight when they cut off my bedroom electricity to save costs. The same week they installed a pool for Madison's summer content creation. I learned to mend my clothes with thread stolen from home economics class, while Madison's closet exploded with packages from sponsors. I learned to smile when teachers asked why my parents never came to parent-teacher conferences. "They're very busy," I'd say, which was true. They were busy attending every one of Madison's events, documenting her life like historians recording a queen's reign. The college conversation was the worst. Madison had applied to USC, UCLA, NYU, all the schools with strong media programs that would support her influencer career. Her application process was a family affair, with hired consultants and essay coaches and strategic donations. When I brought home my acceptance letter to State University's aerospace engineering program, my mother barely glanced at it. "Engineering, Sarah, be realistic. That's very ambitious for someone like you." "Someone like me?" She'd sighed, that particular sigh she reserved for when I was being difficult. "You know what I mean. Madison has the personality for big things. You're more steady, reliable. Maybe you should consider something practical. Accounting, perhaps?" I wanted to scream that engineering was practical, that I'd been accepted into one of the top programs in the country, that I'd done it without tutors or test prep or anyone even asking about my homework. But I just nodded and went to my room, where I'd already started filling out financial aid forms in secret. The funny thing about being invisible is that people forget you're watching. They forget you're learning. I watched my parents pour hundreds of thousands into Madison's dreams, while nickel and dimming my reality. I watched them celebrate her every breath while questioning my right to breathe at all. I watched and I learned and I remembered, like the time Madison crashed Pearl, texting while driving, though she told insurance it was a deer. My parents bought her a new car within a week, never mentioning the 3 months I'd walked to work in snow, because the bus didn't run on Sundays and they wouldn't lend me $20 for Uber. Or when they flew the entire family to Hawaii for Madison's 20,000 follower celebration, booking my ticket in basic economy while they sat in first class. "You don't mind, do you, sweetie? You're so good at making do." Making do. That's what I was good at. Making do with scraps while Madison feasted. Making do with shadows while she basked in spotlights. Making do with crumbs of attention while she gorged on their love. But here's what they never understood about shadows. They're where the strongest things grow. Trees reach their roots deep into darkness before they ever stretch toward the sun. In my storage room, above the garage, in the pre-dawn walks to bus stops, in the silence where their love should have been, I was growing roots they couldn't see. I learned to find mentors in strangers, kindness in unexpected places. The bus driver who waited when he saw me running. The librarian who let me stay past closing to use the computers. The owner of the airport diner who hired me at 16 and taught me that dignity wasn't something anyone could give you or take away. It was something you carried in your spine. "You're different from your sister," he'd told me once, watching Madison pose for photos outside his diner without ever coming in. "She needs everyone to see her. You just need to see yourself." He was right. While Madison collected followers, I collected skills. While she curated her image, I built my character. While she spent their money, I saved every penny from double shifts and overnight inventory work. She was their investment. I was my own. The night before I left for college, State University, aerospace engineering, full scholarship I'd earned without their help or knowledge, I stood in my tiny room and looked at the walls I'd memorized every crack of. My father had commented at dinner that they were converting it to a gift wrapping room once I left. Finally, some use for that space, he'd said. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a backpack, everything I owned fitting into what I could carry. Madison had taken 3 cars to move into her apartment. I would take a Greyhound bus. The difference didn't sting anymore, it just was. I learned to memorize every rejection, not from bitterness, but as fuel, because shame burns brighter than any encouragement they never gave, and I was about to set the sky on fire. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday. I know because Tuesday was meatloaf night, and the smell of my mother's overcooked attempt at domesticity still triggers the memory of what happened next. I'd been home from college for spring break, 4 years into my aerospace engineering degree, working 3 jobs to pay for what scholarships didn't cover. The plan had been simple: finish my degree, apply to flight school, become a pilot. It was a dream I'd nurtured in secret, like a flame cupped between palms in a windstorm. I'd told no one in my family about the application. Why would I? They'd made their opinions about my ambitions abundantly clear. But mail has a way of betraying secrets. "Sarah," my mother's voice carried up to my room, Madison's gift wrapping room that I was temporarily occupying. "There's something here for you." I came downstairs to find my entire family gathered around the kitchen table like it was a crime scene. The letter lay open in the center, its official FAA letterhead visible even from the doorway. My stomach dropped to somewhere beneath the foundation. "You applied to flight school?" My father's voice was incredulous, like I'd announced plans to join the circus. "Without telling us?" my mother added, hurt bleeding into indignation. Madison held up her phone, already recording. "Oh my God, this is hilarious. Guys, you're not going to believe what my sister just did. Give me that." I reached for the letter, but my mother pulled it back. "We've already read it," she said, and something in her tone made my skin prickle. "Sarah, really? After everything we've discussed about being realistic?" "Read it out loud," Madison urged, angling her phone for better lighting. "My followers will die." My mother cleared her throat, and I wanted to disappear into the floor as she began reading my failure aloud. "Dear Ms. Chen, after careful consideration of your application, regret to inform you, highly competitive selection process, encourage you to reapply in the future." "She got rejected from pilot school," Madison narrated to her phone, laughing so hard she could barely hold it steady. "My sister thought she could be a pilot. Can you imagine? She can barely parallel park. Remember when she failed her driver's test twice?" "Once," I corrected quietly, but no one heard me over their amusement. "This is what happens when you reach beyond your capabilities," my father said, shaking his head. "We tried to warn you, Sarah. Some people are meant to fly, and others, well, they're meant to book tickets for those who do." "At least she's consistent," Madison added, swinging the phone toward me. "Say hi to my followers, Sarah. Tell them about your big pilot dreams." I stood there, frozen, as 20,000 strangers watched my humiliation in real time. The comments started rolling in immediately. Laugh emojis, "Oof, that's embarrassing, know your place," each one a tiny dagger finding its mark. "We told you to be realistic," my mother said, tossing the letter onto the table like garbage. Like my dreams were something to be discarded with the coffee grounds and eggshells. "This is a sign, Sarah. Some doors aren't meant to open for people like us." People like us, but she didn't mean us, she meant me. Madison's doors swung wide at her approach. Mine were apparently meant to stay locked. That night, something inside me didn't break. It crystallized. Like coal under pressure becoming diamond, every dismissal, every laugh, every be realistic, compressed into something harder than their skepticism. I lay in that gift-wrapping room, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to shrink. I was going to fly. At 2 a.m., I found myself searching for something, anything, that could help. That's when I found the article about Captain Helena Morrison, the first black female captain at Atlantic Airlines. She'd grown up in foster care, worked 3 jobs to pay for flight training, been rejected by 12 schools before one finally said yes. Her quote at the end made me sit up straight. "The sky doesn't care where you come from. It only cares if you're willing to earn your wings." My hands shook as I found her contact through the airline's website. It was a long shot. Why would a commercial airline captain care about some rejected nobody? But I was out of short shots. All I had left were impossible attempts. I typed and deleted the email 17 times before finally hitting send at 3:47 a.m. "Captain Morrison, you don't know me, but I just got rejected from flight school. My family thinks I'm delusional. Maybe I am. But I read about your story, and I think maybe you understand what it's like when everyone tells you the sky isn't for you. They said no. I need to make them wrong. I will work harder than anyone. I will learn whatever you teach. I just need someone to believe I can do this, because right now I'm the only one who does." I didn't expect a response, certainly not one at 4:15 a.m. "Meet me at Signature Aviation, Van Nuys Airport, 5 a.m. sharp. Bring a notepad and leave your excuses at home. Captain H. Morrison." My hands didn't stop shaking as I slipped out of the house, catching the 4:20 a.m. bus that required a 2-mile walk to the stop. The driver, used to early morning airport workers, barely glanced at me. I clutched my notepad like a lifeline, Captain Morrison's message screenshot, on my phone in case I dreamed it. She was waiting by a Cessna 172 that had seen better decades, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. She was shorter than I'd expected, but her presence filled the hangar. "Sarah Chen?" Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from earning every stripe on her shoulders. "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a long moment. Tell me why I should waste my time on someone who's already been rejected. I could have given her my rehearsed speech about passion and determination. Instead, I told her the truth. Because everyone who was supposed to believe in me doesn't. Because I've been invisible my whole life, and flying is the only thing that makes me feel real. Because they opened my rejection letter and laughed, and I won't let that be the end of my story. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good. Anger is better fuel than dreams. Dreams evaporate. Anger burns clean if you know how to use it." She handed me a checklist. "We start with pre-flight inspection every morning 4 a.m. before my commercial flights. You miss one day, we're done. You complain, we're done. You make excuses, we're done. Understood?" "Understood." "The training will be brutal. These planes," she gestured to the aged Cessna, "aren't pretty. They don't have autopilot or fancy computers. You'll learn to fly by feel, by instinct, by understanding every shudder and shake. You'll study in the dark, work jobs you hate to pay for fuel, and probably want to quit 100 times. Still interested?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought of Madison's live stream, probably edited and posted by now. Thought of my father's dismissal, my mother's certainty that I should know my place, thought of every bus ride, every forgotten birthday, every dream they deemed too big for someone like me. Because I've been riding buses my whole life, I said, it's time I learned to fly. Captain Morrison smiled then, the first crack in her stern facade. Then let's begin. And Sarah, that family of yours, the ones who think you can't do this, they're about to learn that the best pilots come from turbulence, not clear skies. As the sun rose over Van Nuys Airport, painting the sky in shades of possibility, I performed my first pre-flight check under her watchful eye. My phone buzzed with notifications, Madison's video going viral, messages of mockery from people I'd never met. I turned it off and focused on the checklist. I stopped needing their approval the moment I realized I was building wings they'd never see. And Captain Morrison was going to teach me how to use them. The alarm at 3:30 a.m. became my church bell, calling me to worship at the altar of impossible dreams. For 2 years, I lived a double life that would have exhausted Madison's content creation schedule, though she'd never know it. My family assumed I'd given up, gone back to being reasonable, reliable Sarah. They had no idea that reasonable Sarah was learning to defy gravity before the rest of the world even opened its eyes. Captain Morrison didn't just teach me to fly, she taught me to see myself as a pilot before I ever earned the title. You don't become a captain when they give you the stripes, she'd say, watching me struggle with crosswind landings in a Cessna held together by rust and determination. You become one when you decide that no turbulence is stronger than your resolve to reach your destination. My days blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion and exhilaration. The 4 a.m. training sessions before Captain Morrison's commercial flights, then rushing to my job at the airport cafe, where I served coffee to real pilots and studied navigation charts between orders. Afternoons at the warehouse, loading cargo until my shoulders screamed, saving every penny for flight hours. Evenings tutoring high school students in math and physics, using their homework as review for my own aviation calculations. You look tired, my mother commented, during one of my rare visits home, her concern lasting exactly as long as it took to pivot to Madison's latest achievement. Unlike your sister, did you see her collaboration with that wellness brand? She's glowing. Madison was glowing with ring lights and sponsored skincare. I was glowing with jet fuel and purpose, but that wasn't the kind of radiance my family recognized. While Madison posted Tesla selfies with captions about grinding and hustle culture, I was actually grinding. She'd wake at noon, spend 3 hours on a sponsored smoothie bowl, and call it productivity. I'd already logged 6 hours of work before she opened her eyes, studying approach procedures on my breaks, practicing radio calls in the shower, until my roommates thought I'd lost my mind. Tower Cessna 92, Echo Request Pattern Entry, I'd mutter while shampooing, visualizing the traffic pattern at Van Nuys until I could fly it in my sleep, which I often did, dream of flying, not the fantastical dreams of childhood, but technical dreams of power settings and flap configurations, of reading weather patterns in cloud formations, of the precise dance between human and machine at rotation speed. The first time I soloed, Captain Morrison watched from the ground as I took off alone, just me and a tired Cessna and the infinite possibility of sky. I was terrified and alive in ways Madison's carefully curated adventures could never touch. When I landed, bounced really, but successfully, She was waiting with a tradition as old as aviation itself. "Turn around," she ordered, and cut the back of my shirt, signing it with the date and first solo flight. It was the first achievement of mine anyone had celebrated since Munchkin number 3, and I cried right there on the taxiway. "Save the tears for your captain's ceremony," she said, but her eyes were soft. "You've got work to do." So I worked. I haunted that airport like a determined ghost, learning from anyone who'd teach me. Retired pilots who'd fought in wars and flown in weather that would ground modern jets, mechanics who showed me how to read an engine's mood by its sound, controllers who let me sit in the tower on slow nights, learning the poetry of vectoring aircraft through invisible highways in the sky. "Your sister was on the news," my father mentioned during Thanksgiving, Madison absent at some influencer event in Dubai. Something about being in the top 30 under 30 content creators in lifestyle space. "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. Madison's success had never been my enemy. Their inability to see mine was. "What about you?" he asked, the question perfunctory. "Still working at that airport place?" "Yes," I said truthfully. I was working at the airport, working toward my commercial license, working on instrument ratings, working on multi-engine certifications, working on becoming everything they said I couldn't be. But details seemed unnecessary for someone who'd already decided my ceiling was somewhere around ground level. My social media stayed dark, no posts, no updates. No humble brags about 5 a.m. wake-ups or studying until my eyes burned. I changed my last name on all platforms to my middle name, Chen becoming Marie, invisible to family searches. While Madison documented every branded moment, I documented nothing except in my logbook, where each hour was proof that I was becoming someone they'd never imagined. The day I earned my commercial pilot's license, I told no one in my family. The examiner, the same Captain Rodriguez who would later recommend me to Atlantic Airlines, shook my hand with genuine respect. "You fly like someone who learned in the hardest conditions," he said. "That's good. Smooth skies don't make skilled pilots." I sat in my car afterward, holding the license that had cost me everything, sleep, comfort, any semblance of a social life, and felt a success petit ou it was almost sacred. Madison would have live-streamed this moment, turned it into content, sought validation from strangers. I sat in silence, validating myself. Atlantic Airlines hired me 6 months later as their youngest female first officer. The training captain during my type rating was a former military pilot who didn't believe in pulling punches. "You're good," he said after a particularly brutal simulator session. "But good doesn't cut it at 41 sun feet. You need to be exceptional." So I became exceptional. I studied systems until I could trace the hydraulic lines in my sleep. I practiced emergency procedures until muscle memory could save lives without conscious thought. I learned to read weather patterns like a native language, to feel the mood of a storm system 100 miles away. I became fluent in the language of altitude and airspeed, of weight and balance, of the 1,000 small decisions that keep 300 souls safe between earth and sky. 3 years, that's all it took from first officer to captain upgrade. The industry average was 6 to 8, but I wasn't average. I was hungry in ways comfort could never create. While Madison worried about algorithm changes affecting her reach, I was reaching for 4 stripes. While she collaborated with brands, I collaborated with thunderstorms and crosswinds and mechanical failures that taught me more about myself than any sponsored post ever could. The day I passed my captain's check ride, I called Captain Morrison first. "You did it," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm finally flying at the altitude I was meant for," I said. "Good. Remember this feeling when they try to bring you back down, because they will. Success like yours makes people uncomfortable. Be ready." I updated my social media for the first time in 3 years, changing my name back to Chen, adding a simple bio, Captain Sarah Chen, Atlantic Airlines. No explanation, no journey posts, no vulnerability for views. Just the fact of who I'd become while they weren't watching. My phone stayed quiet. My family didn't follow me anymore. Why would they? I'd been dark so long they'd forgotten to look. Madison was probably too busy planning her next Tesla photo shoot to notice her wallflower sister had learned to soar. Success tastes sweetest when served cold and at cruising altitude, and I was just getting started. The invitation to Atlantic Airlines' annual gala arrived at my apartment on a Thursday, heavy cardstock with gold embossing that whispered importance. I traced the words with my finger, Captain Sarah Chen and guest. No +1 needed. I'd learned to stand tall in singular spaces. What I didn't know was that Madison had been angling for months to get her family invited to the same event. Atlantic had recently launched a luxury travel influencer program, and she'd positioned herself as the perfect candidate to showcase their first-class experience to her 500,000 followers. The airline, always eager for organic marketing, had extended invitations to her and our parents as part of a potential partnership. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about reunions. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom was transformed into an aviation dream, with model aircraft suspended from the ceiling and clouds projected across the walls. I arrived in my dress uniform, 4 stripes on my shoulders, that I'd earned with blood, sweat, and more pre-dawn hours than I could count. The other pilots nodded respectfully. I was known now, the youngest female captain in the fleet, the one who'd come up through the hardest route possible. Sarah, Captain Morrison found me near the entrance, resplendent in her own uniform. "Ready for tonight?" "What do you mean?" She smiled mysteriously. "You'll see. Just remember, you earned your place here. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Before I could ask more, the cocktail hour began. I mingled with fellow pilots, discussing route preferences and the new aircraft joining our fleet. Normal shop talk that felt like home. Then, cutting through the professional murmur like nails on glass, I heard it, Madison's laugh. I turned slowly, my champagne glass steady in my hand, despite the sudden earthquake in my chest. There they were, holding court near the bar. Madison sparkled in a designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her phone already out, documenting every moment. Mother wore her usual armor of diamonds and disapproval. Father looked important in his way, chest puffed with proximity to success he hadn't earned. "Can you believe we're here?" Madison was saying to her phone. Atlantic Airlines literally begged me to consider their influencer program. They know my travel content is unmatched. I mean, I've been places, you know, unlike some people who just serve coffee at airports. The universe's humor was darker than I'd thought. I could have walked over then, could have announced myself. Instead, I faded back into the crowd of uniforms, watching them work the room like they owned it. Madison posed with various airline executives, our parents basking in her reflected glamour, none of them noticing the pilots they dismissed as background decoration. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO's voice commanded attention as dinner was announced. "Please find your seats. We have a special evening planned." The head table was reserved for honored guests and senior staff. I took my assigned seat, angled perfectly, to see my family at their influencer table across the room. They were busy documenting the elaborate place settings, Madison narrating each detail for her stories. Still, they hadn't seen me. 4 stripes might as well have been camouflage for people who'd trained themselves not to look my way. Dinner progressed with the usual corporate rhythm. Speeches about quarterly earnings, route expansions, fleet modernization. Madison looked increasingly bored, checking her phone between courses. Then the CEO stood again, his expression shifting from corporate to personal. "Now for my favorite part of these evenings," he began, "recognizing excellence. Atlantic Airlines has always prided itself on finding exceptional individuals, but tonight I want to share a story that embodies everything we stand for." I felt Captain Morrison's hand briefly squeeze my shoulder from the adjacent seat. My heartbeat accelerated to takeoff speed. 3 years ago, a young woman joined us as a first officer. Nothing unusual there, except for how she got to us. Rejected by traditional flight schools. No family money for training. She learned to fly an aircraft most people wouldn't trust for ground transportation, taught by pilots who saw potential where others saw impossibility. Madison's head snapped up from her phone. I saw the moment recognition flickered, not of me, but of the story. She worked 3 jobs to pay for flight hours, studied in airport cafés, spent her 20s in cockpits while her peers were at parties. Her training captain told me she had the most precise hand-flying skills he'd seen in 40 years, because she learned on equipment where precision wasn't a luxury, but a necessity for survival. My mother's fork had stopped halfway to her mouth. My father was leaning forward, confusion creasing his brow. In 3 years, half the typical time, she upgraded to captain, our youngest female captain in company history. She's flown through storms that grounded other flights, handled emergencies, with grace that saved lives, and never once mentioned the journey that got her here. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Captain Sarah Chen. The spotlight found me as I stood, and I heard it, the sharp intake of breath from the influencer table, the clatter of Madison's phone hitting her plate, the whispered, "Oh my God," from my mother. The ballroom erupted in applause, but all I could see were 3 faces cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition of what they'd missed. The CEO continued as I made my way to the podium. Captain Chen represents the best of aviation, not because flying came easy to her, but because it didn't. She's proven that the sky doesn't care about your last name or your bank account. It only cares about your skill, your dedication, and your courage to keep climbing when everyone else thinks you should stay grounded. I reached the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and found my voice, the same one that had guided hundreds of flights safely home. "Thank you, Captain Williams," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. When I was young, someone told me that there are those meant to soar and those meant to stay grounded. They were half right. Some of us are meant to soar. We just have to build our own wings first. I talked about elevation and perseverance, about mentors who see potential in unexpected places. about how the hardest climbs lead to the most spectacular views. I never mentioned family, never pointed to their table, never acknowledged the phone Madison was now holding with shaking hands. But my eyes found theirs once, briefly, and in that moment they knew. Every pre-dawn bus ride, every dismissed dream, every be realistic had led to this podium. The thing about learning to fly, I concluded, is that once you know how, no one can take that knowledge away. It's yours, earned in thin air and thick weather, in crosswinds and clear skies. Tonight, I'm grateful for every rejection that led to the right acceptance, every closed door that forced me to find my own runway. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. As I returned to my seat, I passed their table. Madison's mouth was open, her live stream forgotten. My mother's diamonds caught the light as her hands trembled. My father looked like he was seeing me for the first time in 30 years. I smiled, the same smile I'd perfected at family events, but different now. It wasn't armor anymore. It was grace. The best revenge is success that needs no introduction. It introduces itself. And I had a flight to Tokyo to Captain in the morning. The gala was winding down, conversations flowing as freely as the champagne. When I felt them approaching, you develop a sixth sense for turbulence when you've spent enough time in the cockpit, the subtle shift in pressure that warns of weather ahead. My family moved through the crowd like a storm system, gathering energy as they neared. I was collecting my coat from the check when they cornered me, their formation as practiced as any flight crews. Madison flanked left, phone clutched like a weapon she didn't know how to lower. Mother took center, her face a masterpiece of ruined makeup and dawning recognition. Father hung back slightly, the wingman who'd never quite learned to lead. Why didn't you tell us? My mother's voice cracked on the question, tears streaming down her cheeks, carving channels through foundation that had probably cost more than my first flight lesson. Sarah, how could you not tell us? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with years of unasked inquiries. Why didn't you tell us you were struggling? Why didn't you tell us you needed help? Why didn't you tell us you were becoming extraordinary while we weren't watching? Tell you what, exactly? I kept my voice neutral, professional. The same tone I used when navigating through difficult weather. That I was working at the airport? You knew that. Father mentioned it every holiday, usually followed by a comparison to Madison's latest achievement. But you're a captain. Madison's voice pitched high, incredulous. She held up her phone, and I could see she was still recording, the red light blinking like a warning beacon. A freaking airline captain. I could have made content about this. Do you know how huge this would have been? My sister, the pilot, the youngest female captain. This is literally viral gold. There it was. Even now, in this moment of revelation, I was content to be consumed. A story to be packaged and sold to strangers for hearts and likes. I watched her mind work, already reframing narrative, calculating angles. I could do a whole series, she continued, gaining momentum. My sister went from bus rides to business class. Oh my God, the redemption arc would be incredible. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this? The same reason you never asked, I said simply. You were too busy watching yourself to notice anyone else's journey. My father finally found his voice, reaching for my shoulder, the first time he'd reached for me in years. I stepped back, not cruelly, just clearly, adjusting my captain's hat with the same precision I used for pre-flight checks. Sarah, sweetheart, he started, the endearment rusty from disuse. We had no idea. If we'd known you were serious about flying— You did know, I interrupted gently. You opened my rejection letter, read it at dinner. Madison live-streamed my humiliation to 20,000 strangers. Mother told me to be realistic. You said I should book tickets for those meant to fly, not try to fly myself. That was different, Mother protested. We thought it was just a phase, like when you wanted to be an astronaut in 3rd grade. I still want to be an astronaut, I said, and watched their faces cycle through fresh shock. NASA accepts applications from commercial pilots with sufficient flight hours. I'll be eligible in 18 months. The silence that followed was profound, the kind that occurs at cruise altitude, when the engines fade to white noise and you realize how vast the sky really is. Madison lowered her phone for the first time all evening, staring at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe I always had been. Why didn't you ever say anything? Mother whispered. All these years, why keep it secret? I considered the question, all the possible answers, because you wouldn't have believed me, because you would have found a way to make it about Madison, because some dreams need darkness to grow. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a single first-class ticket to Paris, dated for next month. For whoever needs it most, I said, handing it to them. Though I should mention, the pilot flying that route trained in buses and borrowed dreams. She turned out okay. Madison grabbed the envelope, her influencer instincts kicking in. Wait, are you giving us a ticket? Just one? Sarah, it's what I can offer, I said. 1 seat, first class on a flight I'll be captaining. You can choose who goes. Maybe whoever needs to see that some views are worth more than content. This is ridiculous, Father blustered. We're your family. We should have been part of this journey. We could have helped. How? The question came out softer than I intended. By funding flight lessons like you funded Madison's 3rd gap year? By believing in my dreams like you believed in her influencer career? By showing up for me the way you showed up for every one of her sponsored events? That's not fair, Madison interjected. They supported what they could see. I showed them my dreams. You hid yours. I hid nothing, I corrected. I was invisible. There's a difference. You can't hide when no one's looking for you in the first place. Mother reached for me then, her hands fluttering like birds that had forgotten how to land. Sarah, please, let us make this right. Let us be part of your life now. I smiled, not my armor smile, not my grace smile, but something smaller and sadder and infinitely more honest. You are part of my life. You're the reason I learned to fly solo. Every time you told me to be realistic, I climbed higher. Every time you forgot to ask about my day, I learned to make my days count without witness. You gave me the gift of neglect, and I turned it into wings. That's cruel, Father said. No, I said, adjusting my coat, preparing for departure. Cruel would be broadcasting your failures to strangers for content. Cruel would be reading your rejection letters at dinner for entertainment. I'm not cruel. I'm just done needing you to see me. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking with metronomic precision on the marble floor. At the door, I turned back once, taking in the tableau of their stunned faces. Madison's phone hanging limp at her side, the envelope still clutched in her other hand. By the way, I added, I'm flying the Dubai route next month. Madison always wanted to go there, right? The crew discount is excellent if she'd prefer to pay her own way for once. The night air was crisp as I stepped outside, full of promise and the distant sound of engines. Somewhere above, planes traced paths between stars, each one piloted by someone who'd chosen sky over ground, flight over fear. Grace is the only revenge that leaves no casualties, only mirrors. And I had a pre-flight inspection at 500. I write these words at 41 feet, somewhere over the Pacific, while 347 souls sleep peacefully in the cabin behind me. The autopilot holds our course steady, but I keep my hands near the controls. Old habits from learning in planes that demanded constant attention. Outside my windscreen, stars puncture the darkness like pinpricks of possibility, and I think about how many times I watch them from the ground, wondering if I'd ever get this close. The letter came yesterday, Madison's handwriting, which surprised me. I didn't know she still wrote by hand. The envelope was expensive, her new return address in Monaco, where she'd moved for tax purposes and better content opportunities. Inside, 3 pages of words that must have cost her more than money to write. Sarah, it began. I've been trying to make a video about you for 6 months. Every time I start, I delete it. For the first time in my life, I don't know how to frame the story. I still fly over my hometown twice a week on the Seattle route. From 35,000 feet, every house looks the same. No Teslas visible, no trust funds apparent, just rooftops holding their secrets. Sometimes I think about that gift-wrapping room above the garage, wonder if it's filled with ribbons and bows now, pretty packages for empty occasions. Sometimes I calculate the distance between where I slept and where I fly now. Not in miles, but in choices, each one a degree of adjustment that changed my trajectory. The first-class ticket to Paris went unused. Mother sent it back with a note. "We don't deserve your charity." She was wrong, of course. It wasn't charity, it was chance. The same chance I'd never been given, offered without strings or conditions or the weight of expectation. But some people are so used to weight, they don't know how to rise without it. Father tried differently. He started sending technical questions about aviation, Wikipedia deep inquiries that showed effort if not understanding. How does lift actually work? And what's the difference between indicated and true airspeed? I answered them all patiently, the way I'd wanted someone to answer me when I was young and full of questions they'd found inconvenient. We were building something, not a relationship exactly, but maybe a flight path toward one. But it's the other letters that move me most, the ones from young women who saw the video. Because yes, Madison eventually posted it, though not the version she'd planned. Instead of my sister's secret success story, she called it the dreams I missed while filming my own. It went viral for all the right reasons, a rare moment of honesty in her curated world. Captain Chen, one letter began, "My family says I'm crazy for wanting to be an astronaut. They think I should be more like my sister, the one who married well and posts perfect family photos. Your story made me realize that maybe being the difficult daughter is just another way of saying the one who refuses to stay grounded." I gave her Captain Morrison's number, just as Captain Morrison still gives out mine. We've created an informal network, women who learn to fly in the spaces between other people's attention, who built wings from rejection letters and pre-dawn determination. Last month, one of them sent a photo from her first solo flight. Shirt cut in the traditional ceremony, tears streaming down her face. "I did it," was all she wrote. It was everything. Madison and I talk now, carefully, like pilots navigating around weather. She's changed, or maybe Los Angeles finally showed her who she was when the ring light turned off. Her content has shifted, fewer Tesla selfies, more genuine moments. She interviewed Captain Morrison last month about breaking barriers in aviation. The comment section was full of young women saying, "I didn't know I could do that. Representation matters, even when it comes late." "I spent so long making sure everyone saw me," Madison told me during our last conversation, "that I never learned to see anyone else. Mom and Dad, they raised me to be watched. They raised you to be nothing. Somehow you turned nothing into everything." "Not nothing," I corrected. "Just different. They gave you wings. I had to build my own. Both have their advantages." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you forgive them? Do you forgive me?" It's a question I've considered at altitude, where the air is thin and thoughts come clearer. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about them. It's about weight. Every grudge is extra baggage, and in aviation, weight matters. You calculate it carefully, distribute it evenly, and sometimes you have, to leave things behind, to reach your destination safely. "I forgive you," I told her. "But more importantly, I thank you. Every time you flew past in your Tesla, while I waited for the bus, you taught me patience. Every success you posted while I was invisible taught me that external validation is just weather. It changes. You showed me exactly who I didn't want to be, and sometimes that's the most valuable lesson of all. The sun is rising now, painting the horizon in shades of amber and gold. In 20 minutes, I'll begin our descent into Tokyo, guide this miracle of physics and faith safely back to Earth. The flight attendants are beginning their morning routines, the cabin stirring to life. Soon I'll make my announcement, and 347 people will trust me to carry them home without ever seeing my face. There's poetry in that kind of faith. Sometimes passengers ask how I became a pilot so young. I tell them about Captain Morrison, about pre-dawn bus rides, about studying in airport cafés while serving coffee to people living my dreams. I never mention the family who said I'd amount to nothing, not from bitterness, but because that's not the part of the story that matters. What matters is what you do with the nothing they give you. Last week, a young woman approached me after landing, tears in her eyes because her family didn't believe in her aerospace engineering dreams. I gave her Captain Morrison's number and watched her face transform from defeat to determination. "Tell her Captain Chen sent you," I said, "and remember, they don't get to tell you how high you can fly. Only gravity does that, and even gravity can be defied with the right wings." She hugged me like I was hope itself. Maybe I was. Maybe we all are, every time we refuse to stay where they put us. The descent checklist calls, duty returning me to the present. But first, I pull out my phone and look at the photo Captain Morrison took of me that first morning at Van Nuys. Standing beside a broken Cessna with eyes full of impossible dreams. That girl couldn't have imagined this cockpit, this view, this life built from bus transfers and borrowed belief. Dignity isn't inherited or bought. It's built, one sunrise flight at a time, in the quiet moments when you choose yourself over their noise. The sky doesn't care whose daughter you are, only whether you've earned your wings. And every dawn, I earn them again. Captain Sarah Chen. Somewhere over the Pacific, flying toward sunrise. Did this story touch your soul? If Sarah's journey from bus rides to cockpit pride resonated with you, you're not alone. At Refined Revenge, we believe the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served at cruising altitude with grace, dignity, and undeniable success. Every week, we share stories of quiet triumphs and elegant vindication, stories of people who were counted out, written off, and underestimated, only to rise higher than their doubters ever dreamed possible. No violence, no cruelty, just the beautiful justice of proving them wrong by proving yourself right. Subscribe to Refined Revenge and join a community that understands. Sometimes the best response to "you can't" is becoming living proof that you can. Success doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. The most satisfying revenge is a life well lived. Hit the notification bell because you never know when your story might be the inspiration someone needs to stop riding the bus and start building their wings. Remember, they can doubt your dreams, but they can't stop your flight.